The morning of June 23, 1988, was supposed to mark the beginning of their forever. Instead, it became the day that would make the blood of an entire community run cold. When newlyweds David and Sarah Thompson failed to return from their honeymoon camping trip to Lake Shasta, California, nobody could have imagined that the silence that began that morning would stretch across 22 agonizing years. If you're fascinated by mysteries that defy explanation, cases where the truth emerges from the depths when you least expect it, then subscribe now and hit that notification bell. Because what a recreational diver discovered at the bottom of a reservoir in 2010 would not only shatter 2 decades of theories, but raise questions that continue to haunt investigators to this day. I promise you, by the end of this video, you will understand why the Thompson case remains one of the most perplexing disappearances in Northern California history. David Michael Thompson was 26 years old when he vanished, a man whose presence filled every room he entered. Standing 6 feet 2 inches tall with sandy blonde hair and piercing blue eyes, David possessed the kind of natural confidence that drew people to him like moths to flame. Those who knew him described a man who could fix anything with his hands, from motorcycle engines to broken hearts. He worked as a mechanic at Miller's Auto Repair in Sacramento, where his colleagues respected not just his technical skills, but his unwavering honesty in an industry often plagued by mistrust. David had grown up in the small town of Woodland, California, the eldest of 3 children in a tight-knit Catholic family. His father, Robert Thompson, owned a small construction company, and David had spent countless summers learning the value of hard work under the scorching Central Valley sun. But it was his gentle nature that truly defined him. His younger sister, Michelle, would later tell investigators that David had never raised his voice in anger, not once in all her memories of growing up together. Every Saturday morning, without fail, David could be found at St. Monica's Catholic Church, not because he was forced to attend, but because faith genuinely anchored his life. Father Martinez, who had known David since childhood, described him as someone who lived his beliefs rather than merely speaking them. David volunteered at the local food bank, spent his lunch breaks teaching automotive basics to at-risk teenagers, and never missed a family birthday or graduation. His daily routine was as predictable as sunrise. David woke every morning at 5:30, spent 20 minutes doing push-ups and sit-ups in his small apartment, then stopped at Rosie's Diner for black coffee and wheat toast before arriving at work by 7. His co-workers knew they could set their watches by David's arrival. He was the kind of person who returned lost wallets with the cash still inside, who remembered the names of every customer's children, who never left a job half-finished. Sarah Elizabeth Patterson was 24 when she disappeared, a woman whose laughter could chase away the darkest clouds. Standing 5 feet 6 inches, with chestnut brown hair that caught sunlight like spun gold, Sarah possessed an infectious optimism that made everyone around her believe that tomorrow would be better than today. She worked as an elementary school teacher at Riverside Elementary in Sacramento, where she was beloved by students, parents, and colleagues alike. Sarah had moved to California from Portland, Oregon, following her graduation from the University of Oregon with a degree in elementary education. Her decision to relocate had been driven by her desire to make a difference in communities where resources were scarce, and hope was sometimes scarcer still. She chose Riverside Elementary specifically because it served predominantly low-income families, and she believed every child deserved a teacher who saw their potential rather than their limitations. In her classroom, Sarah created magic from mundane materials. She transformed empty cardboard boxes into castles for reading adventures, turned arithmetic lessons into treasure hunts, and somehow made every struggling student feel like the smartest person in the room. Her principal, Margaret Collins, would later describe Sarah as the teacher every parent hoped their child would have. Someone who combined high expectations with infinite patience. Outside the classroom, Sarah was equally devoted to helping others. She spent her weekends tutoring students for free, organized school supply drives for families who couldn't afford basic materials, and had single-handedly established a breakfast program for children who arrived at school hungry. Her small apartment was always filled with graded papers and creative lesson plans, evidence of the countless hours she invested in her students' success. Sarah met David on a rainy Thursday evening in February of 1987 at Blessed Sacrament Catholic Church during Ash Wednesday services. Sarah had been searching for a church community since moving to Sacramento, and David had been attending Blessed Sacrament since childhood. After the service, when Sarah struggled with her umbrella in the parking lot, David approached and offered to help. Their first conversation lasted 3 hours in the church coffee shop, covering everything from their shared faith to their dreams of travel and family. Their courtship was the kind that made others believe in true love again. David would surprise Sarah with wildflowers picked from his construction sites, while Sarah would leave encouraging notes in David's lunchbox. They discovered they both loved hiking, shared a passion for helping others, and dreamed of having a large family. David proposed on Christmas Eve, 1987 during midnight mass, presenting Sarah with his grandmother's simple gold band, enhanced with a modest diamond he had saved months to afford. Their wedding on June 4, 1988, was a celebration that the entire community embraced. Over 200 guests packed Blessed Sacrament Catholic Church to witness their union. Sarah's dress was a simple but elegant creation that had belonged to her deceased mother, altered to fit perfectly by David's sister, Michelle, who was an accomplished seamstress. David wore his father's wedding suit, pressed and tailored for the occasion. The reception was held at the church hall, decorated with white roses and baby's breath that Sarah's students had helped arrange. The couple's first dance was to At Last by Etta James, and there wasn't a dry eye in the room as David whispered something in Sarah's ear that made her throw back her head and laugh with pure joy. Wedding guests would later remember it as one of the happiest celebrations they had ever witnessed. For their honeymoon, David and Sarah chose a camping trip to Lake Shasta, a destination that perfectly reflected their shared love of nature and their practical approach to finances. They wanted to save money for their future home, but they also craved adventure and solitude after the excitement of their wedding week. Lake Shasta offered both, stunning natural beauty at an affordable price, with opportunities for hiking, swimming, and simply enjoying each other's company away from the demands of daily life. The morning of June 23, 1988 dawned clear and unseasonably cool for Northern California in late June. The temperature at sunrise was 62 degrees, with weather forecasters predicting a perfect day with highs reaching the mid-80s and gentle breezes from the west. David had loaded their red 1984 Ford pickup truck the previous evening with camping gear, food supplies for 4 days, and the fishing equipment he hoped to use to catch their dinner at least one evening. Sarah had spent the early morning hours at their apartment, packing her carefully chosen honeymoon clothes and double-checking their supplies. Her best friend and maid of honor, Jennifer Walsh, had stopped by at 7:30 that morning to wish them farewell and help carry their camping equipment to the truck. Jennifer would later tell investigators that Sarah seemed absolutely radiant, practically glowing with excitement about their adventure. At 8:15 that morning, David made his final stop at Miller's Auto Repair to pick up a fishing rod he had forgotten and to assure his boss, Frank Miller, that he would return to work the following Tuesday morning as planned. Frank remembered David seeming unusually energetic, talking excitedly about teaching Sarah to fish and exploring the hiking trails around Lake Shasta that he had visited as a teenager with his father. Sarah's final interaction before their departure was with her next-door neighbor, Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, an elderly widow who had become like a grandmother to Sarah since her move to Sacramento. At 8:45, Sarah knocked on Mrs. Patterson's door to give her a spare key to their apartment, and to ask her to water the small herb garden Sarah had planted on their shared fire escape. Mrs. Patterson later recalled that Sarah seemed to practically sparkle with happiness, chatting about how much she was looking forward to 4 uninterrupted days with her new husband. The couple departed Sacramento at 9:27 that morning, according to the gas station receipt found later in David's wallet. They stopped at Murphy's gas station on Highway 99 North, where David filled their truck's tank and purchased snacks and bottled water for the journey. The attendant, a teenager named Bobby Martinez, remembered them clearly because they seemed so obviously in love, holding hands while walking around the truck and laughing at private jokes. Their planned route would take them north on Interstate 5 for approximately 160 miles to the Lake Shasta area, where they intended to camp at a remote site David had discovered during family trips in his youth. The spot was accessible by a narrow dirt road that branched off from the main highway near the Shasta Dam, leading to a secluded area on the lake's eastern shore where few tourists ventured. According to their itinerary, which Sarah had left with Jennifer Walsh, they planned to arrive at their campsite by early afternoon on June 23rd, set up their tent, and explore the immediate area, then spend the following 3 days hiking, fishing, and simply enjoying their first days as husband and wife. They were scheduled to return to Sacramento on the evening of June 26th, giving David 1 full day to rest before returning to work. The last confirmed sighting of David and Sarah occurred at 1:15 that afternoon at Lakehead Market, a small grocery store approximately 15 miles south of their intended camping location. Store clerk Maria Santos remembered them purchasing ice, additional bottled water, and sunscreen. Maria later told investigators that Sarah had asked for directions to the camping area David had described, and Maria had drawn a simple map on the back of their receipt, marking the turnoff from the main road and estimating the distance to the lakeside camping spots. What happened next remains one of the most puzzling aspects of their disappearance. Based on Maria's directions and the normal driving time to their destination, David and Sarah should have arrived at their campsite between 2 and 2:30 that afternoon. They should have had plenty of daylight to set up their tent, explore their surroundings, and begin what they hoped would be the most romantic 4 days of their lives. Instead, they vanished as completely as if the earth had opened and swallowed them whole. When David and Sarah failed to return to Sacramento on the evening of June 26th, as CT planned, their absence initially caused more concern than panic. David's sister Michelle had been expecting them for dinner that evening, but when they didn't arrive by 8 o'clock, she assumed they had simply decided to extend their honeymoon by 1 extra day. Young couples in love often change their plans spontaneously, and Michelle thought nothing of it. The first real alarm bells began ringing the following morning when David failed to appear for work at Miller's Auto Repair. Frank Miller had been in business for over 20 years, and he prided himself on knowing his employees' character. David Thompson had never missed a day of work without calling, had never been even 15 minutes late without an explanation, and Frank knew that nothing short of a serious emergency would keep David from fulfilling his obligations. At 9:30 that morning, Frank called David's apartment and received no answer. By 10:15, he had contacted Michelle Thompson, who confirmed that her brother and new sister-in-law had never arrived for their planned dinner the previous evening. Michelle immediately called Sarah's friend, Jennifer Walsh, who verified that the couple had not made contact with anyone since departing for Lake Shasta 4 days earlier. By noon on June 27th, both families had gathered at the Thompson family home in Woodland to decide on a course of action. David's father, Robert, contacted the Shasta County Sheriff's Office, while Sarah's mother, Patricia, who had driven down from Portland overnight, called the California State Police. Both agencies initially followed standard procedures for missing persons, explaining that adults had the right to change their plans and that many camping trips were extended due to weather or simply the desire to enjoy nature longer. However, the responding officers' attitudes changed dramatically when they learned more about David and Sarah's characters and circumstances. These were not impulsive people who might spontaneously alter their plans without notifying family. They were responsible adults with jobs, commitments, and people who depended on them. Sarah had 28 elementary school students expecting to see their beloved teacher on Monday morning, and David had customers waiting for completed automotive repairs. The official search began at dawn on June 28th. Shasta County Search and Rescue deployed 12 volunteers along with 2 bloodhounds to comb the area around Lake Shasta, where David and Sarah were believed to have been camping. The search teams focused initially on the eastern shore locations that matched Maria Santos's directions from Lakehead Market, looking for any sign of their campsite, their red pickup truck, or the couple themselves. What the searchers discovered only deepened the mystery. Despite covering nearly 20 square miles of shoreline and wilderness area over 3 days, they found absolutely no trace of David and Sarah's presence. No campfire, rings, no tire tracks matching their pickup truck, no discarded food wrappers or personal items, nothing to indicate that the couple had ever reached their intended destination. The breakthrough came on July 1st, when search teams expanded their area to include more remote locations around the reservoir. Deputy Sheriff James Morrison discovered their red Ford pickup truck parked at the end of an unmarked dirt road, approximately 8 miles from where David and Sarah had originally planned to camp. The vehicle was found unlocked, with the keys still in the ignition, but completely empty of personal belongings. Inside the truck, investigators found David's wallet containing his driver's license, credit cards, and $47 in cash, along with Sarah's purse, which held her identification, emergency contact information, and $32. On the dashboard lay the hand-drawn map that Maria Santos had created for them at Lakehead Market, suggesting they had indeed followed her directions but had chosen a different camping location than they had originally planned. Most puzzling of all was what wasn't found in the truck. None of their camping equipment, clothing, food supplies, or personal belongings were present. David's fishing gear was missing, as was Sarah's camera, which she had specifically mentioned to Jennifer Walsh as her way of documenting their first adventure as a married couple. It appeared as though someone had deliberately removed every trace of their camping trip from the vehicle. The area around the truck revealed few clues. The ground was rocky and hard-packed, making it impossible to determine clear footprints or track the direction David and Sarah might have traveled after parking. However, the dirt road where their truck was found led directly to a remote section of Lake Shasta's shoreline, an area so secluded that even experienced local outdoorsmen rarely visited it. Within 48 hours of finding the abandoned pickup truck, the Shasta County Sheriff's Office had expanded their investigation to include potential foul play scenarios. Detective Lieutenant Carol Williams, who had been assigned as lead investigator, began exploring the possibility that David and Sarah had encountered someone with malicious intent during their honeymoon camping trip. The community response to David and Sarah's disappearance was extraordinary. even by the standards of small-town solidarity. Within 1 week of the couple being reported missing, over 300 volunteers had joined organized search efforts coordinated by local churches, civic organizations, and concerned citizens who had been touched by the young couple's story. Blessed Sacrament Catholic Church, where David and Sarah had been married just 3 weeks earlier, became the unofficial headquarters for volunteer coordination. Father Martinez opened the church hall as a staging area where families could organize search teams, distribute missing person flyers, and provide meals for exhausted volunteers returning from long days combing the wilderness around Lake Shasta. Sarah's students at Riverside Elementary School created a massive banner reading, "Bring Our Teacher Home," that was displayed at the school's entrance, while David's co-workers at Miller's Auto Repair posted reward notices throughout Sacramento offering a $1,000 reward for any information leading to the couple's safe return. Local television stations picked up the story, broadcasting photos of David and Sarah alongside pleas from their families for any witnesses to come forward. The investigation revealed several puzzling elements that defied easy explanation. Interviews with campground hosts, park rangers, and other visitors to Lake Shasta during the last weekend of June produced no credible sightings of David and Sarah after their stop at Lakehead Market on June 23rd. It was as if they had driven into the wilderness and simply ceased to exist. Detective Williams explored numerous theories during the initial investigation phase. The possibility of an accidental drowning seemed unlikely, given that both David and Sarah were strong swimmers, and no bodies had been recovered despite extensive searches of Lake Shasta's waters. The theory of animal attack was similarly dismissed after wildlife experts confirmed that the region's black bear and mountain lion populations rarely threatened humans, and no evidence of animal activity had been found near their abandoned truck. More sinister possibilities included robbery gone wrong, random violence by transient criminals, or encounters with illegal drug operations known to operate in remote areas of Northern California. However, the fact that valuable items like David's wallet and Sarah's jewelry had been left in their truck argued against robbery as a motive. Additionally, no known criminal activity had been reported in the Lake Shasta area during late June of 1988. The impact on both families was devastating and complicated by the complete absence of resolution. David's parents, Robert and Helen, struggled with the uncertainty, alternating between hope that their son and daughter-in-law would somehow return safely and despair that they might never learn what had happened. Sarah's mother, Patricia, took a leave of absence from her nursing job in Portland and moved temporarily to Sacramento to be closer to the investigation and to the places where her daughter had been happy. Perhaps most heartbreaking was the effect on David's younger sister, Michelle, who had been planning to be the godmother to David and Sarah's future children. Michelle threw herself into search efforts with almost manic intensity, spending every weekend for months driving to Lake Shasta to walk the shorelines and trails, hoping to discover some clue that professional searchers had missed. The first anniversary of David and Sarah's disappearance brought renewed media attention and a temporary surge in tips called into the Shasta County Sheriff's Office. Most leads proved fruitless: mistaken identity sightings in other states, reports from well-meaning but confused witnesses, and sadly, several cruel hoax calls from individuals who seemed to derive satisfaction from tormenting the grieving families. However, one tip received on June 23, 1989, exactly 1 year after the couple's disappearance, seemed more credible than others. A man, identifying himself as a retired truck driver, claimed to have seen a red pickup truck matching the description of David's vehicle parked along Highway 29 near Clear Lake, approximately 60 miles southwest of Lake Shasta, on the evening of June 24, 1988. The caller, who provided his name as William McCarthy, described seeing two people standing near the truck who appeared to be in some kind of distress or argument with a third person whose vehicle was not clearly visible in the darkness. McCarthy claimed he had considered stopping to offer assistance, but had decided against it when he noticed the third person appeared to be quite large and possibly aggressive in manner. Detective Williams drove to Portland to interview McCarthy in person, finding him to be a credible witness with no apparent motive for fabricating his story. However, McCarthy's account raised more questions than it answered. If David and Sarah had indeed been at Clear Lake on June 24th, what had led them so far from their intended camping location at Lake Shasta? Who was the mysterious third person McCarthy claimed to have observed? And why had their truck eventually been found back at Lake Shasta, nearly 60 miles from McCarthy's sighting location? Despite extensive investigation of the Clear Lake area, including interviews with local residents and businesses, no corroborating evidence was ever found to support McCarthy's account. The lead eventually went cold, leaving investigators with yet another puzzling piece of a seemingly unsolvable mystery. As months turned into years, theories about David and Sarah's fate became increasingly exotic and desperate. Some community members speculated about serial killers who might have been operating along Northern California highways during the late 1980s. Others suggested connections to organized crime or even government cover-ups, though no evidence supported such dramatic scenarios. The most persistent theory involved the possibility that David and Sarah had witnessed something they weren't supposed to see, perhaps illegal drug cultivation or transportation through the remote wilderness areas around Lake Shasta. Proponents of this theory argued that the couple had been eliminated to prevent them from reporting what they had observed, and their bodies had been disposed of in ways that would prevent discovery. By the 5th anniversary of their disappearance in 1993, media interest had largely faded, and active investigation efforts had been scaled back significantly. The case remained officially open, but with no new leads or evidence, Detective Williams had been reassigned to other cases, and the Thompson disappearance had become just another cold case file gathering dust in the Shasta County Sheriff's Office. The emotional toll on both families continued to mount as years passed without resolution. David's parents aged dramatically, their hair turning white and their health deteriorating under the stress of never knowing their son's fate. Helen Thompson developed severe anxiety and depression, while Robert threw himself into work with almost obsessive intensity, as if staying busy could somehow bring his son home. Sarah's mother, Patricia, eventually returned to Portland, but never recovered from her daughter's disappearance. Friends described her as a shell of her former self, going through the motions of living without ever truly engaging with the world around her. She kept Sarah's childhood bedroom exactly as it had been, maintaining hope that her daughter might somehow return, while simultaneously grieving as if Sarah were definitively dead. Michelle Thompson married in 1992, but chose to keep the Thompson name as a way of honoring her missing brother. She and her husband named their first child David, and Michelle made a point of visiting Lake Shasta every year on the anniversary of her brother's disappearance, leaving flowers at the location where his truck had been found and maintaining her own private vigil of remembrance. The community's memory of David and Sarah began to fade as new tragedies and concerns took precedence in people's daily lives. Riverside Elementary School dedicated a memorial garden to Sarah in 1991, and Miller's Auto Repair kept a framed photograph of David in the office. But for most people, the young couple became just another sad story that older residents occasionally shared with newcomers to the area. By the dawn of the new millennium, 12 years after David and Sarah's disappearance, their case had achieved the unfortunate status of local legend rather than active investigation. Parents used their story to warn children about the dangers of camping in remote areas, while true crime enthusiasts occasionally discuss the case in online forums, speculating about solutions that professional investigators had long since exhausted. Detective Dapritrin Williams, now approaching retirement, would later admit that the Thompson case haunted her more than any other during her 30-year career in law enforcement. The complete absence of physical evidence, witnesses, or logical explanation made it impossible to develop viable leads, and the genuine goodness of the victims made their fate seem especially tragic and senseless. In 2005, 17 years after the disappearance, the Shasta County Sheriff's Office received funding to create a cold case unit specifically designed to review unsolved cases using new forensic technologies and fresh investigative perspectives. The Thompson case was among the first files reviewed, but even advanced DNA analysis capabilities and improved database searches failed to produce new leads or evidence. The breakthrough that would finally provide answers to David and Sarah's fate came from an entirely unexpected source, and in a manner that no investigator could have predicted. In the spring of 2010, 22 years after the couple had vanished, recreational diver Marcus Chen was exploring the depths of Whiskeytown Reservoir, approximately 40 miles southwest of Lake Shasta, searching for interesting underwater formations to photograph for his hobby blog. Marcus was an experienced diver with over 15 years of underwater exploration experience, specializing in freshwater environments throughout Northern California. He had chosen Whiskeytown Reservoir for his dive. That day, because of reports from other divers about interesting rock formations at depths of 60 to 80 feet, formations that created underwater caves and overhangs perfect for photography. The reservoir itself was created in 1963 with the completion of Whiskeytown Dam, designed to provide water storage and recreation opportunities for the region. Over the decades, the reservoir had become popular with boaters, swimmers, and divers, though most recreational activities occurred in relatively shallow areas near the shoreline. The deeper sections where Marcus planned to dive were rarely explored by casual divers. On May 15, 2010, at approximately 10:30 in the morning, Marcus entered the water from the reservoir's eastern shore and began his descent toward a formation he had identified during previous reconnaissance dives. The water was unusually clear that spring morning, with visibility extending nearly 30 feet in the deeper sections, ideal conditions for underwater photography. At a depth of 73 feet, Marcus encountered something that initially confused him. Partially embedded in the muddy bottom of the reservoir, covered by more than 2 decades of sediment accumulation, was what appeared to be the rusted remains of a vehicle. His first assumption was that he had discovered an old farm truck or construction equipment that had been submerged when the reservoir was filled decades earlier. However, as Marcus cleared away sediment and examined the vehicle more closely, he realized he was looking at something much more recent than the reservoir's original construction. The vehicle appeared to be a pickup truck from the 1980s, and despite extensive corrosion and damage from decades underwater, several identifying features were still visible. Marcus photographed the submerged vehicle from multiple angles, then carefully explored the immediate surrounding area, searching for any other objects that might have been related to the truck's presence at the bottom of the reservoir. What he discovered next made his blood run cold and sent him racing toward the surface to call authorities immediately. Scattered around the submerged truck, partially buried in sediment but clearly visible to Marcus's trained eye, were numerous personal belongings that had obviously been in the vehicle when it entered the water. Camping equipment, clothing, and other items had been preserved in the cold, oxygen-poor environment of the reservoir's depths, creating an underwater time capsule from 2 decades in the past. Most shocking of all were the human remains that Marcus discovered inside the truck's cab. 2 complete skeletons, still wearing remnants of clothing and jewelry, were positioned in the front seat exactly as if they had been driving when the vehicle somehow entered the reservoir. The preservation was remarkable due to the cold water and lack of scavengers at that depth, allowing investigators to later make positive identification through dental records. Marcus immediately surfaced and called 911 from his cell phone, reporting his discovery to the Shasta County Sheriff's Office and requesting immediate response from their dive team and coroner's office. Within 3 hours, the reservoir area had been sealed off as a crime scene, and professional investigators were preparing to conduct the most significant underwater recovery operation in the region's history. The recovery operation took place over 4 days in late May 2010, involving professional divers from the Sheriff's Office, forensic experts from the California State Police, and specialized underwater recovery equipment borrowed from federal agencies. Every item found in and around the submerged truck was carefully cataloged and brought to the surface for examination. The truck was positively identified as David Thompson's 1984 Ford pickup through VIN number verification, confirming what the presence of personal belongings had already suggested. The human remains were identified as David and Sarah Thompson through dental record comparison, finally answering the question of their fate after 22 years of uncertainty and speculation. However, the discovery also raised new questions that proved even more puzzling than the original disappearance. How had David and Sarah's truck ended up in Whiskeytown Reservoir, more than 40 miles from Lake Shasta, where their abandoned vehicle had originally been found? The timeline made no logical sense, and forensic examination would reveal details that challenged everything investigators thought they knew about the case. Forensic analysis of the truck and its contents revealed that the vehicle had been submerged for approximately 20 to 22 years, consistent with David and Sarah's 1988 disappearance date. However, examination of the truck's condition and position suggested that it had entered the water with considerable force, as if it had been driven or pushed off a cliff or steep embankment at high speed. The truck's final resting position at the bottom of the reservoir indicated that it had landed right side up and had sunk relatively quickly, trapping David and Sarah inside before they could escape. Both victims showed evidence of significant trauma consistent with a high-speed impact, suggesting they may have been unconscious or already deceased when the vehicle entered the water. Most puzzling was the condition of their personal belongings, found scattered around the submerged truck. The camping equipment, clothing, and other items were exactly what would have been expected from their planned honeymoon trip, but forensic examination revealed something impossible to explain. According to manufacturing dates and other evidence, some of the items appeared to have been purchased or acquired after June 23, 1988, when David and Sarah had already disappeared. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, the forensic pathologist who examined the remains, confirmed that both David and Sarah had died from trauma consistent with a vehicle accident, but she could not determine whether they had been conscious when their truck entered the reservoir. The preservation of their remains was so complete that she was able to identify specific injuries that suggested they had been involved in some kind of struggle or altercation before their deaths. Perhaps most mysterious of all was the discovery of a handwritten note found in David's shirt pocket, protected from decay by the waterproof plastic bag in which it had been sealed. The note, written in Sarah's distinctive handwriting, contained a message that would baffle investigators and family members. If anyone finds this, please know that we loved each other until the very end. What happened to us was not our choice. Please tell our families we never stopped trying to come home. The note was dated June 27, 1988. 4 days after David and Sarah's disappearance, and 1 day after they were supposed to have returned to Sacramento. This meant that somehow, despite extensive searches and media coverage, the couple had remained alive and hidden for at least 4 days after they were reported missing. Where had they been during those crucial days, and what had prevented them from contacting their worried families? Additional forensic evidence painted an even more confusing picture. Analysis of the truck's interior revealed traces of rope fibers around both David and Sarah's wrist bones, suggesting they may have been restrained at some point before their deaths. However, no rope was found with the bodies, and investigators could not determine when or why the couple might have been tied up. The truck's gas tank was completely empty when recovered, but this could have been explained by decades of underwater exposure. More puzzling was the condition of the engine, which showed evidence of having been running when the vehicle entered the water, but also displayed damage consistent with deliberate sabotage or tampering. DNA analysis of trace evidence found in the truck revealed the presence of genetic material from at least one unidentified individual, someone who had been in the vehicle but was not David or Sarah. However, the DNA was too degraded after 2 decades underwater to provide a clear profile that could be compared to databases or used to identify the unknown person. The location where the truck had entered Whiskeytown Reservoir was eventually identified through careful analysis of the vehicle's final position and condition. Investigators determined that it had gone into the water from a steep, rocky promontory on the reservoir's northern shore, an area so remote and difficult to access that few people ever visited it even during daylight hours. The discovery of David and Sarah's remains brought a measure of closure to their families, but also opened new wounds and raised questions that may never be answered. After 22 years of wondering whether their loved ones were alive somewhere, possibly suffering from amnesia or held against their will, both families finally knew that David and Sarah were dead, and had been since sometime in late June of 1988. However, the circumstances of their deaths remained as mysterious as their original disappearance. How had they ended up more than 40 miles from Lake Shasta at Whiskeytown Reservoir? Who was the unidentified person whose DNA had been found in their truck? What had happened during the 4 days between their disappearance and the date of Sarah's final note? And most importantly, had their deaths been accidental? Or had David and Sarah been murdered? Detective Carol Williams, now retired but still haunted by the case, reviewed all the evidence from the underwater recovery and reached a disturbing conclusion. In her professional opinion, David and Sarah Thompson had been kidnapped shortly after arriving at their planned camping location, held captive for several days by person or persons unknown, and ultimately murdered when their captor or captors drove their truck off the cliff into Whiskeytown Reservoir. The motive for such a crime remained unclear, as did the identity of the perpetrator or perpetrators. Williams theorized that the couple may have witnessed illegal activity during their camping trip, been mistaken for someone else, or simply had the misfortune to encounter a disturbed individual who decided to harm them for reasons known only to themselves. Current investigators assigned to the case, now classified as a double homicide rather than a missing persons investigation, continue to pursue leads and examine evidence using modern forensic techniques unavailable in 1988. The unidentified DNA found in the truck remains their best hope for eventually solving the case and bringing justice for David and Sarah Thompson. The community response to the discovery of their remains was complicated, mixing relief at finally knowing their fate with renewed grief at the confirmation of their deaths. The memorial service held in July 2010 drew over 500 attendees, including many people who had participated in the original search efforts more than 2 decades earlier. Father Martinez, now in his 80s, but still serving at Blessed Sacrament Catholic. Secrets eventually come to light. Church delivered a eulogy that brought tears to everyone present. He spoke of David and Sarah as examples of pure love, young people whose commitment to each other and to their faith had inspired everyone who knew them. He also expressed hope that their killer or killers would eventually be brought to justice, though he emphasized the importance of forgiveness even in the face of such senseless tragedy. Sarah's former students, now adults with children of their own, created a scholarship fund in her memory to help disadvantaged students pursue careers in education. David's co-workers at Miller's Auto Repair established a foundation to teach automotive skills to at-risk youth, honoring his memory by continuing his work of helping others learn practical life skills. Michelle Thompson, now in her 50s, finally felt able to grieve properly for her brother and sister-in-law after more than 2 decades of uncertainty. She had spent years unable to move forward with her life, always wondering if David and Sarah might somehow return. The discovery of their remains, while heartbreaking, allowed her to finally accept their deaths and begin healing from the trauma of their disappearance. The Thompson case has become a cautionary tale about the dangers that can lurk even in seemingly safe recreational areas, and it continues to generate discussion among law enforcement professionals about the importance of thoroughly investigating missing persons cases, even when no evidence of foul play initially exists. The 22-year gap between David and Sarah's disappearance and the discovery of their remains demonstrates how long the truth can remain hidden, even when it lies relatively close to where investigators are searching. Today, 37 years after David and Sarah Thompson vanished on their honeymoon camping trip, their case remains officially unsolved. While investigators know how and approximately when they died, the questions of who killed them and why continue to haunt both law enforcement and their surviving family members. The Whiskeytown Reservoir area, where their truck was discovered, has become an unofficial memorial site, with visitors occasionally leaving flowers or other tokens of remembrance at the overlook above, where David and Sarah spent their final moments. Park rangers report that